How's it going, everybody? This is Chad from Vintage Retrospect, and tonight we're going to do the history of nose cones and fairings and which rocket used the first nose cone and the first rocket to do a fairing. They both need to be deployable, and I'm also going to be doing US and Soviet versions. So we're in the VAB right now. Let's just get started here. And do a pod, a couple of them, because why not? And then gonna do a decoupler below it. And we're gonna do a decoupler below that. And then we're going to place this below that. I'm going to do some stabilizers. Symmetry of 4. And launch. Alright, we're sitting out on the pad. It's time to go launch. And we have a problem. And we don't have a problem. Alright, as we're ascending, the first US nose cone was actually an ablated heat shield version of a nose cone. It was the first of its kind because they needed to be able to recover it from space. This was used on the Jupiter C rocket, and this occurred on August 8th of 1957. The same rocket, of course, was the one that attempted to launch the Explorer satellite into orbit. This is also the rocket that was going to try to beat the Soviet Union from getting the first satellite into space. But that did not go so well. And that is definitely an episode for another time. So, this second stage seems to be pretty stable here. I'm going to begin to do a gravity turn. And that did not go so well. So I'm going to deploy the nose cone to show you what it's supposed to do, but KSP is very buggy. So let's revert to the VAB and let's start on deployable fairings. The first deployable fairing on a rocket was, again, the Soviet Union beat us. This was on an ICBM R7. So what we're going to want to do here is take this rocket apart and delete the fairing because we've got an issue. And I know staging is definitely one of them, but I did not like that fairing deployment at all. So I think we need to bump up the size of the payload fairing to a large. We're going to go ahead and build this. And we're going to pretend it's a fairing and not a nose cone. The game yet does not have both. We have to use our imagination. Now this might look funny. I have a plan. There are step-down fuel tanks that you can use to match it back up. There we go. Looks good to me. Oh, let's go check our staging here. So one of our issues was that we did fire the first engine and it didn't have the thrust to weight ratio to leave the pad. So we're going to remove that engine right there. And we're going to use a very powerful engine. I think this is the one we used last at 1500 of thrust. Yeah, let's bump that up to 3,700 to 4,200 of thrust. So as we're trying to figure out our engine issue, I think we found the engine we need to use. It's this guy here. We had used this one last, it was only 500 thrust. This thing has 1,600. It probably won't have very good thrust vectoring, but we'll see what happens. And the first US fairing, deployable fairing, was on a Thor Able rocket. April 1958. just shortly after the R7 had launched the first satellite ever. So in a nutshell, between 1957 and 1961, that's when all these space firsts occurred. I'm gonna go change views here because when I start the gravity turn, it always glitches out. There we go. We'll just hold it right there. Just some bonus facts for you. Ever since the Jupiter C rocket, the next rocket to use a deployable nose cone was the Thor Delta. Keep in mind, the Thor Delta actually came out before the Thor Able. And to review the Thor Able rocket, that has the deployable fairings. And the reason that it became that way was the Thor Able had a very wide tip of the fairing, so it could have room for the Pioneer space probe. And this space probe was actually circular in shape. And don't confuse the Pioneers 1 through, I think it's 6 or 7. Those were circular shaped and very small, but Pioneer 10 and 11 had the big satellite dish looking thing, and it was a lot larger and had a magnetometer on those. This flight seems to be going pretty well here. We're just going to go straight into orbit here. We're not going to do any coasting. And let's demonstrate a deployable fairing. That did not go so well. So if you have subscribed to this channel, you probably know that all my flights do fail. And hey, I have no problem with that. And if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe and hit the like button. And if you do both, this keeps the video on the top of the feed so that people who are looking for hilarious Kerbal Space Program content and they want to learn about history as well at the same time, they will find this video. I'm going to leave this flight right here. And good night, guys. And I will see you out on the launch pad.